My name's Ian. I'm 29, and until about 4 months ago, I thought I understood what family meant. I grew up believing in the kind of household where you stick together no matter what, where blood is thicker than water and all that. But apparently, that only applies when you're the daughter who makes mistakes, not the son who quietly keeps his head down and tries to survive. My sister Clara is 27, 2 years younger, but she's always been the golden child. She could set the living room on fire, and my parents would find a way to blame the lighter. I was the quieter one, the bookworm, the old soul who didn't ask for much. Clara? She asked for everything. And somehow, she always got it. About a year ago, Clara made what she described as a small business investment. What it actually was. She followed her sketchy boyfriend into some dropshipping crypto-adjacent scam that bled her dry in 5 months. She lost her apartment, tanked her credit score, and racked up nearly $40,000 in debt. Naturally, my parents came running. They emptied their emergency savings, even dipped into their retirement fund, and proudly told everyone they were giving her a second chance. They called it love. They called it what any parent would do. That was in March. In May, I got sick. Really sick. I'd been putting off a lingering stomach issue for months because I didn't have great insurance, and I figured I was just being dramatic. But one night, I passed out in my bathroom. I woke up in the ER, hooked up to N4. The doctor said if I'd waited another week, I might have died from a ruptured ulcer and a spreading infection. I needed surgery, nothing experimental, nothing cosmetic. Just a basic laparoscopic procedure to remove part of my stomach lining and keep me alive. The cost? Around $12,600 after insurance. Not small, but not outrageous. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, weak and trembling, trying to explain everything to my parents. My hands were still shaking from the medication, and I was swallowing every ounce of pride just to ask them for help. I wasn't even asking for the full amount, just enough to cover what I couldn't. Dad barely looked up from his coffee. He just shook his head like he was disappointed in me. "You should have been taking better care of yourself," he muttered. I stared at him, stunned. "I'm not asking for a handout," I said, my voice cracking. "I'll pay it back. Every cent." That's when he said it. "She has a future, Ian. You're just a burden." Those 5 words. I still hear them sometimes when I try to sleep. Then Mom chimed in with her soft, condescending tone, like she was the voice of reason. "We can't save you both," she said, as if I were a sinking ship that wasn't worth the rope. We already did what we could for Clara. The room fell quiet after that. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just nodded and said, "Thanks for the clarity." I moved out a week later. I didn't make a scene. I just quietly packed my things, canceled the utilities in my name, and left my key on the counter. I found a cheap studio apartment near the city hospital where I'd be undergoing the surgery. Thankfully, I had some savings of my own and a couple of friends who didn't hesitate to spot me what I couldn't cover. They didn't guilt-trip me. They didn't ask me what I'd done to deserve this. They just helped. Funny how people with no blood ties can feel more like family than the ones who raised you. The surgery went well, but recovery was brutal. I spent a week unable to move without wincing, another week throwing up everything I ate. I was alone through most of it, save for 1 or 2 friends who came by with groceries. My phone stayed silent. No calls. No texts. Not even a get well card. It was like I'd vanished from their family group chat the second I said I wouldn't be the silent punching bag anymore. But I didn't spiral. I didn't wallow. I started making plans. See, what my parents didn't know is that I'd been quietly helping them for years, paying for car repairs, covering surprise medical bills, even wiring Clara money back when she was figuring things out in LA. I kept records of everything. Every Venmo receipt, every text exchange where they asked for a small favor. At first, I did it because I loved them. Then I did it out of guilt. But by the end, I think I did it because I wanted proof. Proof that I mattered. I also had access to a joint investment account that my late grandfather had left behind when I was managing for tax reasons, because no one else in the family could be bothered to understand financial paperwork. They thought I'd just keep handling it out of loyalty. For a while, I did. But then came the 4th month. My health stabilized. My strength came back. And with it, a strange, focused clarity. I looked at my situation, at everything I'd endured, and I realized something. They didn't expect anything of me. Not love. Not success. Not even survival. I was invisible until I was useful. So I became silent and useful to myself. It started with the account. I reviewed every clause, every stipulation in the will, and realized something beautiful. The funds were meant for family emergencies. But there was no clause defining who got to decide what that meant. And as the only person with power of attorney on the file, I didn't have to ask permission. I made a few quiet moves, a few signature changes, and then I took action. I won't say exactly what I did yet, but let's just say I made sure they noticed my absence. Not just emotionally, not just physically, financially, structurally. The kind of absence you feel in your mortgage statements and your utility bills. The kind of absence that makes you look around and wonder, how did we lose control of this? And now? Now they're calling. Every day. Mom left a voicemail yesterday in that frantic, breathy tone she always used when she was trying to sound maternal. Ian, honey, just call us back. We're worried. We just want to talk. Dad's messages are colder. You're being immature. Enough of this. Clara even texted. Just one line. If this is about what Dad said, he didn't mean it like that. I didn't respond to a single message for 3 weeks. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had too much. And none of it deserved to be handed out in a text thread or a panicked call. I wanted them to feel what silence actually means. Not the kind of silence that comes from awkward dinners or ignored birthdays, but the kind that echoes, that grows louder the longer it's ignored. The kind that makes you question your own memories and choices. In the meantime, I got my strength back. Started working again, part-time at first, then gradually full-time. I took better care of myself. Signed up for therapy. Cut back on helping people who never helped me. And slowly, I began to realize I didn't need their version of family to be whole. I just needed to let go of the idea that they'd ever see me the way I wanted to be seen. But I wasn't done. Let me back up for a second and explain what that move was that they didn't see coming. So remember the investment account I mentioned earlier? The one Grandpa left behind? Turns out, when he passed, he left a quiet trail of trusts and clauses in place, something about safeguarding the next generation from repeating the mistakes of the last. And while my parents always said he was a soft old man with no backbone, the truth is he didn't trust them. Not completely. He trusted me. He made me the executor of his estate when I turned 25. Didn't tell anyone. I didn't even realize the depth of it until I started combing through the legal papers during recovery. And buried in that fine print was a provision that said the executor had sole discretion over the emergency family fund, the one my parents had been dipping into for Clara's blunders for the past 6 years. They thought that account had about $7,000 left. What they didn't know is that Grandpa had also invested in some long-term municipal bonds that matured last year and were quietly rolled into the fund without any notice. By the time I discovered it, the balance was just over $86,000. And because I had sole control, I made 3 moves. First, I had the account formally renamed, with my name as the primary beneficiary and manager. Second, I transferred 60% of the fund into a separate trust under my name, locked from access unless by direct court order. And third, I froze their access to the original joint account due to suspicious activity and reclassified it under administrative review, which, thanks to my documentation of how the funds were spent over the years, with no repayment or justification, qualified as misuse under the terms of the trust. In short, I didn't take the money. I protected it from them. And then I waited. At first, nothing happened. I assumed they hadn't checked the account yet. Or maybe they just assumed the balance was low from bailing Clara out, so they weren't in a rush to use it again. But then came the calls. Dad called first. Hey, just wondering if you know why the trust account isn't letting us in. We tried to set up a transfer to help Clara with rent. Just a short-term thing. I didn't answer. 2 days later, Ian, this isn't funny. Your mother's worried sick. Call us back. I didn't. Then I got an email from Mom. One of those passive-aggressive ones dressed up like concern. Hi, honey. We noticed some changes with Grandpa's fund. If you've done something, we just want to understand. Maybe we made mistakes. We're all human. But please don't do something you'll regret. Family sticks together. Family sticks together. That one made me laugh out loud. The message that broke the dam came from Clara. She texted me on a Tuesday afternoon. Okay, I don't know what you did, but Dad is livid. He said you're sabotaging the family. Please call him before this gets worse. Worse? I hadn't even started. A few days later, Dad showed up at my apartment building. I saw him through the peephole, red-faced, pacing, muttering to himself on the phone. I didn't open the door. He left after 30 minutes and didn't leave a note. Just called again and again, his tone angrier each time. But even then, I stayed silent. What they still didn't know, what they couldn't know, is that I'd also taken steps with Grandpa's legal firm. I arranged for a formal audit of the original withdrawals they'd made from the account over the past 6 years. I had statements, screenshots, texts, invoices for Clara's business expenses that were clearly fraudulent. I compiled it all and sent it to the firm with a note. Please review for potential breach of trust guidelines, per Article 12 of the original estate documentation. I got a polite response 2 days later from a woman named Margaret at the firm. She thanked me for being thorough, said they'd be opening a quiet review. This could take some time, she warned. I told her I had time. And then, the real fallout began. Clara called me one night, slurring her words. Do you even know what you've done? She snapped. You've ruined everything. They were going to help me get a new place, and now the account's frozen. I'm behind on rent again. Do you even care? I finally replied. Did you care when I was in the hospital and no one visited? When I couldn't afford to eat and Mom said I was just being dramatic? Did you care? There was silence. Then the call dropped. No apology. No, I didn't know. Just silence. It's strange, the things you feel after something like that. You expect satisfaction, relief, power. But what I felt? Free. That's when I knew I was ready for the final step. The move they really didn't see coming. The one that would finally sever the strings they thought they could always pull. The final step wasn't revenge. It wasn't about punishing them, at least not in the traditional sense. It was about closing the door they kept pushing open with guilt and manipulation. It was about making it permanent this time. I spent the next week putting everything in motion. I started with my will. I know, dramatic for a 29-year-old, right? But after the health scare, I wasn't taking chances anymore. I met with a lawyer, recommended by a friend, who helped me draft everything cleanly. Simple language. Ironclad. I made sure none of my assets, current or future, would ever funnel back to them. Not a cent. Not a slice of equity. Not a penny from my savings, retirement, or insurance. Then I went to the bank and updated my beneficiaries. Removed both of my parents and Clara from every form and every policy. Listed a friend of mine, Jude, as my emergency contact instead. Jude's the kind of person who shows up without being asked. He's seen me at my worst and never judged me for it. I've known him since college, and not once has he ever made me feel like an afterthought. Then came the hardest part. There's this storage unit in town where I kept a bunch of family stuff, photo albums, letters, a few heirlooms that Grandpa left behind. My parents had no idea I had them. After Grandpa passed, I volunteered to handle the cleanup of his house, and they didn't care enough to question what I took. Inside that unit were photos of my childhood. Birthday cards from my 6th birthday. A framed photo of Clara and me in a sandbox, her arm around my shoulder. It used to mean something. But when I looked at it now, all I saw was how the image was frozen in time, while the reality had slowly rotted beneath it. I didn't throw them away, but I did something I never thought I'd do. I boxed them up, labeled them, returned to sender, and dropped them off at my parents' house early in the morning, before anyone was awake. I placed the box right on the doorstep. No note, no explanation, just a box full of memories they no longer deserved. And that same day, I went to the post office and filed a change of address form. Not just for mail, but for everything. I removed them from all emergency contacts, scrubbed them from any access to my accounts, and made sure every trace of my life was no longer linked to theirs. Then I made one more stop. The law firm handling Grandpa's estate had an office downtown. I met with Margaret in person. She was in her 60s, sharp-eyed, polite in that firm but kind way. We reviewed the audit progress, and she confirmed that several expenditures were flagged as unjustified withdrawals. That opened the door to consequences, possibly even civil litigation, depending on how far I wanted to take it. I don't want to sue them, I said. Margaret tilted her head. Then what do you want, Ian? I thought about it for a second. The way my father didn't even flinch when he called me a burden. The way my mom nodded along like it was a reasonable thing to say. The way Clara had always floated through life, confident that someone would bail her out, because someone always did. I want them to know I'm done, I said. Not angry. Not screaming. Just done. Margaret nodded, took a few notes, and slid a file across the desk. Then you'll want to sign this. It formally transfers all discretionary control of the trust into your new private account. They'll receive a notice that access has been permanently revoked. That should make things clear. I signed it. 2 days later, all hell broke loose. My phone exploded with calls. Not text calls. I hadn't heard my phone ring that much since college finals. First it was Mom, then Dad, then Clara again, using some new number, then my aunt, then my uncle. Someone even left a voicemail pretending to be a lawyer, like I wouldn't know it was my dad using a fake name. Then came the group email. It was actually titled Family Intervention in all caps. It was a desperate attempt at emotional blackmail, loaded with, "We didn't mean it like that," and "You've always been part of this family," and "Let's sit down and talk like adults." The kicker? They attached an old photo. Me at 10, wearing a handmade birthday crown, standing between my parents while Clara made a face behind me. The subject line? "Don't erase this." It almost worked. I stared at that photo for 10 minutes. Just sat there on my bed, holding the phone, remembering the scent of cake frosting and the way I used to think my family would always protect me. I remember Dad pushing me on the swing set, Mom braiding Clara's hair on the porch. All the little illusions. Then I remembered lying in that hospital bed, too weak to stand. The empty phone. The silence. And Dad's voice in my head again. "She has a future. You're just a burden." That photo didn't mean what they thought it did. It wasn't proof of love. It was proof of convenient love. Of image. Of pretending. Of only showing up when someone else was watching. So I replied. One line. "Thanks for the photo. You can keep the past. I've already moved on." That was a week ago. I haven't heard from them since. Not directly, at least. But yesterday, Jude told me he got a strange voicemail from my dad, asking if I was okay. Asking if I was spiraling. Saying they were worried. Worried. Funny. The only time they ever worried about me was when I stopped answering the phone. But they still don't know the final piece. The thing that'll hit the hardest. The part that'll finally close the door, no matter how many times they knock. And that's what comes next. I gave it one more week. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to see if the silence would settle, if they would stop trying, if the guilt they tried to manufacture would eventually flicker out on its own. It didn't. Not quite. The last call I received came 3 days ago. From my mom. She didn't yell, didn't sob. She just spoke in this hollow, strange whisper like all the emotion had been drained from her voice. "We raised you," she said. "We did our best. Maybe we weren't perfect, but you're our son. I don't know what's gotten into you, Ian. This isn't who you are." And I just stood there in my kitchen, holding the phone to my ear, while that line, "This isn't who you are," rang through my head like a cheap bell. But she was wrong. This is who I am. Not cold, not heartless, but someone who's finally learned not to set himself on fire to keep others warm. I didn't answer her. I just listened. And when she hung up, I blocked the number. One final tap of the screen, and it was done. Now, here's the part they really never saw coming. The last piece I hadn't told them, the final quiet move I'd been planning for nearly 4 months, had to do with Grandpa's legacy. Not the money, not the house, not even the trust fund. It was his name. See, my grandfather was a first-generation immigrant who started his own small company back in the early 1970s. Nothing huge, just a modest property management business that slowly grew through consistency and word of mouth. When he passed, it had a portfolio of 6 properties and a reputation for integrity. He left it to my dad to manage, but gave me part ownership as a legal buffer because, in his words, "Your father means well, but he doesn't always think things through." Well, not thinking things through was putting it mildly. After Grandpa passed, Dad got cocky. He refinanced one of the buildings to pay for Clara's entrepreneurial journey, which tanked in less than a year. Then he hired Clara to do bookkeeping, despite the fact that she once called Excel that green math app. She wasn't just bad at it. She was criminally careless. Rent payments weren't recorded. Utility bills were missed. Repairs went unaddressed. By the time I realized what was happening, after noticing late payment notices and tracking inconsistencies in the shared accounting log, one of the tenants had already moved out. Another filed a complaint with the city. That's when I made my move. Grandpa had placed a clause in the company's ownership structure. If any partner could prove mismanagement that threatened the long-term stability of the business, they could file for controlling interest. I filed the paperwork quietly with a corporate lawyer. 2 months later, I was legally granted full decision-making power. My father? Removed as managing partner. Clara? Let go. The board of directors, what little there was, approved it unanimously once they saw the books. My first act? I rehired the former property manager Dad had replaced, fixed the backlogged repairs, and reinstated the tenant support hotline. I also moved the business account to a new bank, where I set up strict spending protocols. But most importantly, I renamed the company. I dropped our family name entirely. Instead, I renamed it after Grandpa's middle name, one that had never been used professionally. I made the branding about legacy, responsibility, care. And then I sent a formal notice to my father and Clara. Effective immediately, you are no longer authorized to act in any capacity on behalf of the company previously known as Langley Properties. All accounts, assets, and communication channels have been reassigned under new management. Please direct any questions to our legal department. No further contact is necessary. I never heard back. Not one word. And that silence? It finally felt right. I'd taken back more than money, more than power. I'd taken back control of my own narrative, something they'd hijacked years ago and rewritten to suit their comfort. In their version, I was the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who would always come home for Thanksgiving no matter how many times they stepped on me. But I wasn't their story anymore. Now, I lived in a different part of the city. My apartment was small, but clean, filled with my things, my decisions. I had a growing group of friends, people who checked in, who laughed at my dumb jokes, who didn't measure my worth against someone else's failures. And yet, there were moments, quiet ones, when I'd wake up and feel this sudden, raw ache for something I couldn't name. Not regret, just grief, maybe. The kind that sneaks up on you when you realize the people who raised you never really saw you. But grief passes, eventually, like a bad storm. And sometimes, healing isn't loud. It's just choosing, day by day, not to let someone's cruelty define you. Not even if they're family. Especially if they're family. The last loose end came unexpectedly, through a letter. It was from one of Grandpa's old tenants, a retired teacher named Mrs. Bennett who lived in one of the units for over 20 years. She wrote to say thank you for the repairs, for keeping her rent stable, for sending someone to fix her bathroom heater without her needing to call 5 times. At the bottom, she wrote, "Your grandfather would be proud, not because you saved the buildings, but because you remembered who they were for." I sat there for a long time, staring at that line. And for the first time in years, I felt something unshakable settle in my chest. Peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't plotting. I wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come. I was just done. They could spend the rest of their lives pretending they didn't push me away. They could rewrite history, say I overreacted, say I was always distant. But the truth? I gave them more chances than they ever earned. I gave them more love than they ever returned. And when they made me choose between my health and their convenience, I chose me. And I'll keep choosing me every single time.